Right now we're in Colorado, and this part of Colorado back in the 1800s used to be a major mining district, and they pulled a lot of gold, silver, and copper out of this area. And I come up here a lot exploring around, and earlier this summer I found a really neat mine site way up in the middle of nowhere. And today we're going to go up there and we're going to take a look at this site, and we're going to talk a little bit about the history, the geology, and then at the end of the video I'm going to show you a nice rich piece of ore that was brought out of this mine. Back in the olden days, when those old timers were out in areas like where we're at right now, and if they found some ore, they found an outcropping, something that looked promising, and they were usually after gold or silver. How it worked is they would go to the nearest municipality, and every district had different rules and bylaws and all that good stuff. But commonly, they would go to the local municipality, make sure nobody else had a claim, and then they were free to file their claim. And there's been an effort in recent years to take all of those old registries, all of those old claims, and transfer them to the digital record. And that way people like you and me can do research. But as you can imagine, back then there were literally thousands upon thousands of old claims that were filed. And I read some accounts where they estimate around 6,000 claims were filed out here in the Old West. And that's a very conservative estimate. They really don't know how many claims were filed in total. But so most of those old claims, they never made it to the digital archive. And there's no trail or anything like that going up to the site. We're going to visit. It's about an hour and a half hike through stuff like this. But most of the old mines and the old diggings that I find, if I'm really interested in them, I'll try to research them and see what history I can find. And about 98% of the time I can't find anything, not in the digital archives at least. But this particular mine that we're going to visit, I was very lucky and I was able to find some information. I'm going to leave out the relevant details because I don't want to give away the location of the mine. But the old timer, he put a claim on this mine in the 1800s, and he worked it until 1903, 1904, and then he called it quits. And he was pulling gold, silver, and copper out of this old mine. Well, we made it. We are at the old mine site. And this right here that we're looking at, this is what you call a dugout. This is where the old miner, where he would have lived. And this mine it's not small, but it's not very big, but it's too big to where this old miner, he would have needed help. So there was more here than just him working this old mine. But the miner, maybe another guy, they would have lived in here. This would have been the main house. And this one's actually a little bit bigger than the typical ones I find. And it's pretty nice. But it's kind of cool. You still have a lot of the old remains, and this would have been built in the 1800s. And right here, this is your entrance to it. And then this one has a fireplace. The old timer built a fireplace right back there. But he would have kept all of his personal belongings in here. The guy who lived in here, this would have been the claim owner. He would have owned the mine. And he probably lived here year round, or as long as he could. The only time he would have left would have been during the deep winter when the snow got too deep and he had no choice. He would have had to have left for his survival. But in here, you know, of course, he would have had his personal belongings, and he also would have kept some money. And then that way, if one of his workers, his helpers, you know, got pissed off or had an emergency and had to leave, this way he could pay them, you know, and make everything straight. But right back behind us, it's kind of hard to tell, but this whole area has been kind of leveled off, and you can tell where they removed the rocks. So this would have been the area they were working out of. And his helpers, the other miners that were working up here, they would have lived in this area in tents. And that was quite common back then. I read a lot of old mining books, history books, and that's typically how they would do it for more of like the temporary miners. And then the permanent miner, the claim owner, you know, he would have a permanent structure, but a lot of the helpers and the workers, they would live in tents. And then out here, you know, in the evening time, and this is where they would have ate their supper, they would have ate their breakfast out here. They would have had, you know, a fireplace somewhere around here, or I mean a fire pit, and they would have stood around at night. They would have laughed and joked and told stories, maybe played a little cards, did a little gambling. It was quite common back then that, you know, you'd at least have one guy who knew how to play the harmonica and could carry a tune. But they would have spent their evenings out here, out of the mine, enjoying the nice, fresh mountain air. And if you had a metal detector or something like that, oh man, you could probably find all sorts of neat stuff here, just buried a few inches under the ground. And then for food, they at these old mining camps like this, they would most definitely kill wild game if they had a chance, you know, like a deer, elk, bear, stuff like that. And then when they had their downtime, that was something they would do just for recreation. They'd go out hunting and stuff. But for the most part, they relied on bringing in their own food. And right over here, we're going to look at an area where they were storing their food. And you'll notice a lot of their old garbage, these old tin cans. And back then, these would have contained usually evaporated milk, different meat products, and sardines and stuff like that. But right here, this is where they were storing their food and their supplies. And you can see the remains of the rock structure. It's all squared off. And then of course it would have had a wood covering. And you can see their old cook stove right here. So they would have been cooking their food right here and then enjoying it over in that community area where we just came from. But they always covered their food for the same reasons we do today, because of bears. Not back then, you not only had to worry about black bears like we do now, but they would have had to worry about grizzly bears. And the last thing they would have wanted was for a grizzly bear to be coming in their camp, trying to get in their food and messing around with them. But really neat stuff. The food area we're just looking at is right there. And right here, you have this beautiful mineral. And it's kind of cool because those old timers, they would have placed this right here. And to think this was stuck here over 100 years ago. But this mineral, this beautiful green mineral you're looking at right here, this probably played a bigger part in human history, human advancement, than any other mineral that I know of. And what this is this is called malachite, and it's a copper type mineral. And back in the ancient times, they would take this mineral, carve it into jewelry and different religious artifacts and stuff like that. And then the Chaldeans and the Sumerians figured out that if you take this, crush it, and heat it up, you know, smelt it, you can extract a metal out of it, and we call that metal copper. And then they shared this knowledge with the ancient Egyptians, and from there it spread throughout the ancient world. And that's how the Copper Age began. And of course they would take the copper and they would make different tools, jewelry, weapons, coins, all sorts of good stuff. And then some unknown genius, whose name has been lost to history, figured out that if you add a little bit of tin to that copper, you get an entirely different metal, and we call that metal bronze. And so the Copper Age ended and the Bronze Age began. But really pretty stuff. Right now we're at the old mine site, and those old timers, they dug this one deep. That's a long ways down. If you ever fall in there, you're not coming out, at least not alive. And there's a reason they dug this so deep, and that's what we're going to talk about. And this process is called Supergene Enrichment. And you have a lot of alterations, you have primary and secondary type minerals, and there's a whole lot of chemistry involved to make this all work. But basically what happens is, see this kind of rust colored vein right there, that vein structure? That is a sulfide vein. And when sulfide veins like that reach the surface of the earth, a lot of times they'll form what's called an iron cap. And that old iron cap is right over there, and we're going to take a look at it next. And then this iron cap will contain different sulfide minerals, usually a lot of pyrite. And then you have chemical type weathering, where the surface water, and the surface water comes from the rain, snow melt, and it'll contain a lot of dissolved oxygen and CO2. And the surface water will start to oxidize those sulfide minerals. And this will create a solution that has a low pH. It's slightly acidic. And this acidic solution will start to percolate down through the rocks. And as it does that, it's going to start to dissolve and absorb the different metals and minerals that it comes into contact with. And then you have a lot of different zones involved in these supergene enrichment type structures, and that's where all the chemistry comes into place. But what happens is when you start getting all the way down there, you start coming to what's called the enrichment zone. And then you have a process called reprecipitation, where these metals will come out of solution back into solid form, and then they will react and bond, creating what's called secondary type minerals. And these secondary type minerals will usually have a higher concentration of metal than the primary minerals. And so that's why the old timers had to go so deep into the ground on this one. They had to get all the way down to the enrichment zone to get to this high concentration of metal. And in this mine, the primaries were copper and silver. So that was the main mineral they were bringing out. And the secondary was gold. Right there, that's the old mine shaft we're just looking at. And right here, on top of that vein structure, this is where that iron cap would have sat, right here. And that old timer, you can see where he dug it out. And we're going to talk about why he did that. And this is what you call a Gossan. There's different types of Gossans. Gossan just simply means like an outcropping of mineral that's decomposing. But most of the time when you hear of Gossans, people are talking about Iron Gossans like this. And those old timers, they would look for these Iron Gossans because they found a lot of minerals. And they had an old phrase to describe them. And they would say gold wears an iron hat. And the hat being the old iron cap, the Gossan that used to sit over the top of this. And so they would view this like a geological crime scene. And they would come in here and they'd dig into this, looking for clues that would tell them what minerals they might find underneath. And a lot of those clues, and I imagine there's some superstitions, but they've kind of been lost to history, but I do know of a few of them. Right here, I don't want to walk across that because I'm really suspicious there's a vertical shaft that's just kind of covered over by some probably rotted logs and rocks and dirt. So we're going to go around this way. So bear with me, the camera might get a little bit shaky. But some of those clues they would look for, the first one would be what's referred to as boxworks. And these would be the impressions, the remains of old sulfide minerals. And so they would look for impressions in the outcropping, in that decomposing iron. So like, for example, like a square, say you have the impressions of little squares in this, that'd be a good indicator that one time there were pyrite minerals in here that had dissolved away. Another impression, boxwork type clue they'd look for is, say you had like kind of like a wavy line. That'd be a good indicator of chalcopyrite. So that would mean down in this vein structure, you'd have probably a lot of copper. They would look for quartz. That was always a good sign. They would look for dark colored rock because that's usually a good sign of sulfide minerals. They'd look for a real porous surface in this, kind of think of like a sponge, because that was a good indicator that at one time you had a lot of minerals in here that had oxidized. And all of this that you see right now, like this is all just limonite. This is all rust, just decomposed limonite. Look at that. But really pretty, all the colors you get. Really neat stuff. But this is what an Iron Gossan looks like. Anytime you find an old mine site, like the one we've been looking at, one thing you should always try to look for is where they were keeping their ore, because they were stacking their ore somewhere. And I'm talking about the rich ore, the high grade ore, the ore they were taking to the mill, to town, wherever to sell. And lucky for us, right here is where they were stockpiling their good ore, and they left a piece for us. It's right there. Now, they didn't leave that out of the goodness of their heart, I assure you that. But at one point in time, this would have just been a big old pile of ore, and that piece got covered under probably a lot of dirt and sediment. And over the last 100+ years, you know, it's just been re-exposed. And I imagine there's some other pieces buried here and there. But we'll take a look at this real quick, and we'll see what they're pulling out of here. And remember, in this mine, copper and silver were the primaries, and gold was your secondary. But this is it right here. And so we'll start with the copper. I think the copper is the most interesting. All right, see all this stuff looks like gold? This is all chalcopyrite. This is a very common ore found around the world. In fact, this is probably where a good chunk of your copper comes from. So whatever device you're watching this video on, you know, your smartphone, your TV, your laptop, there's a good chance that the copper components in that device came from this stuff right here, this chalcopyrite. And then you have, hopefully the camera will pick it up, you see this grain mineral? This is your malachite. That's also a copper ore. That's that same mineral that we're looking at earlier. Remember that big chunk of rock? Well, that rock, it came out of this mine, so they were pulling a lot of malachite out of here. And your chalcopyrite, this contains about 33% copper. And then this malachite, this contains about 50% copper, give or take. And then you'll see a lot of gray, this gray mineral kind of mixed in here, and kind of black in some places. That is called chalcocite, and that is also a copper mineral, a very rich copper mineral. And chalcocite will contain usually right around like 78, 79, 80% copper. Now remember, in the mine, in that supergene enrichment process, we talked about those primary and secondary type minerals, and the secondary type minerals would have a higher concentration of metal, right? So chalcopyrite, you could almost say this was your primary. This was the source of the copper. And then as this went down in that solution and reprecipitated, you started getting malachite. So now we went from 33% copper to 50% copper. And then as it went down deeper into that enrichment zone, we ended up forming chalcocite, which is about 80% copper. So it progressively got richer in copper the further and deeper it went into the mine. And then your silver. And I know in the camera this probably all looks kind of similar, but when you look at it under a loupe, you know, you have different characteristics and stuff. But see these little veins right here? There's a couple of little veins. This is what you call acanthite, and this is your silver mineral. And acanthite is probably the most common source of silver, not only here in Colorado, but in the world. Most of your silver mines, this is what they're mining, is this acanthite, this silver mineral. And then the gold, there's little pieces of gold just free mill gold disseminated throughout this piece of ore, but it's mainly concentrated down here around the silver. And when my camera won't focus in on it, so what I'll do is I'll take a close-up picture of it. I can see it really good using my loupe, but my camera, I'm going to try to zoom in as close as I can and get a picture of that, and then I'll post it up there where you can see what the gold looks like. But a really neat piece of ore. And I'm glad it's still here because this kind of tells us the story of what they were bringing out of this mine. That piece of ore we just got done looking at, you know, if you think about it, that's what made America rich back in the 1800s. Those men out here working in areas where we're at right now and bringing that ore to the market. That was like the grease for the economy. And, you know, these guys, man, they spent 12 plus hours a day down in these deep holes, and there was no safety regulations. There wasn't OSHA. There was nothing like that. And a lot of these guys, man, they got crippled up. They got killed. You know, just a rock falling from up here and hitting them would instantly kill them. And for them, you know, when they got crippled or disabled, that was pretty much meant they were going to have a life of destitution. There was no social welfare programs, nothing like that. They were pretty much on their own. And if they didn't get crippled up or killed, they still died a very young death. Down there for 12 hours a day, breathing in all that garbage. A lot of them got silicosis of the lung, and that killed many of them off. But these old guys were tough, you know, and I just think that's something we kind of forget about is the sacrifices that they made and their contributions to helping make America, you know, such the great country that it is. It's really rare to find an old mine site that is still this intact. You have the old dugout they were living in. You got some of their old garbage, their cook stove, the area where they were storing their food. You have the old mine, and then you even have a piece of ore that came out of the mine. And so all that together, you know, it's kind of a unique site. And this site is, it's way out in the middle of nowhere, and it's a long and pretty difficult hike to get in here. And I think that's why this site has just remained so isolated and protected. And if you think about it, the site is kind of like a museum. It's like an old mining museum out here in the middle of nowhere. And that's why I didn't want to mess with that piece of ore. I thought a little bit about it and taking it home and just putting it somewhere in the backyard or something like that. But the more I thought about it, you know, that ore should stay here with everything else, and it kind of completes this site. And so that's why I didn't want to mess with it. But I hope you enjoyed exploring this old mine as much as I did. And thanks always for watching the videos, and until next time.